What we're going to do next is kind of have just a panel discussion about the frontiers of natural language processing. A couple things I want to do first. I just want to, again, thank the Berkeley Institute for Data Science for hosting us here today. We have several BIDS fellows who are in attendance now. Weekly on Thursdays, we have these BIDS lunches. We all come together, and so we thank you, BIDS and BIDS fellows, for sharing the moment with us. We got introductions to everyone up here except for John Nero, who's joining us from UC Berkeley's Geeks department. John is something of a local celebrity in data science and is he looking shy? In data science and natural language processing. If you've ever used Google Translate to make sure you were ordering the food you wanted to order in some faraway place, you should give some thanks to John Deere. He's instrumental in that project. This is what I'm going to do to kick us off. I'm going to pass the mic down, and the first question is just going to be a lightning round. Try not to pontificate for too long, but the question is, what do you think is the frontier of natural language processing, either on this campus or in industry or just out in the world? What's the frontier of natural language processing? What's the future?
So, as someone who works in industry with, and I'm more familiar with people who are like kind of in the trenches, dealing with like the text that's being generated and being used to make business decisions, I think that a really important frontier is making I mean, this is probably not a huge shock that I'm about to say this, but like making accessible tooling for people who are informing decision making for people's business decisions, so that all this text that is out there is not just generating and sitting there and waiting for some really complex algorithm, but that people are making at least these first simple steps. And so I think in industry, like that's where we are, is that we're for the vast majority of companies and the vast majority of data scientists who have statistical background, like getting those people to handle text to start with is where we are.
So this may be a little bit more out there on the AI side of things, but what I'm really excited about is being able to do question answering straight from text documents. So imagine if you have an arbitrary document, and rather than having to read through it and actually take the time to understand it, just being able to query it like you would a database. Thinking about how that would change our work processes.
I'm really excited about modeling interaction with humans. We can now generate fluent text about lots of things, but when you get to the point where you're trying to have dialogue with a human or interact with a human somehow, then you have to think about what they're going to do and what they know about your language and things like that.
I'm interested in knowledge graphs, in particular knowledge graphs that are useful for specific fields of study like political science or economics. Any of the off-the-shelf ones like Wikidata or Wikipedia or WordNet or things you might be familiar with break down very quickly when you try to study something that's not this year, that's not in English, that's not the US, and hand building those from scratch is very painful and labor intensive, and trying to automate that's an important task.
And actually, Rex, I made a mistake. Rex is speaking tomorrow. Maybe you want to introduce yourself slightly.
Okay.
Just a little bit.
I direct the Machine Learning for Social Science Lab at UCSD, which we just started. It's underneath the Center for Peace and Security Studies, which we also just started. And we're awarded a 5-year grant, so we're off and running and hiring a bunch of folks and trying to work the interface between existing social science questions and data and these large linked data sets that the computer science folks and information folks have made for us.
So my interest is, again, I'm not somebody who advances the science of natural language processing, but I'm just ready to jump on whatever you guys make. So for us as social scientists, we've been struggling with text for years to try to get beyond just sort of like basic little sort of codings that they're able to do. And generally speaking, there's a sort of a complicated configuration of some constellation of stuff like I was talking about today, sort of like how do you go about understanding the emergence of social movements around constellations of situations, actors, emotional sentiments, and kinds of sort of triggered situations that lead to particular kinds of outcomes. So stuff like that is actually really hard to code when you've got a bunch of people who are just like, your undergraduates saying, like, look for this, look for that. So what I'm really excited about is as NLP sort of advances, that we'll be able to begin to use it for sort of these fundamental coding projects that will be able to, I think, completely change what we do with social science, frankly. Because we've got this big data now, we just have to figure out how to get used to it, get access to it, use it. That's what I'm really counting on.
Yeah, so I think the main advantage of a lot of the new algorithms, maybe deep learning or LSTMs, is they give us more insight into a more complicated model of language. So something like the relationship between styles and associations and topic subject of topics. And so I think being able to interpret these very complicated algorithms, I think, is the cutting edge there.
Yeah, I would echo on what others have already mentioned. Specifically, my interest is enabling better tooling to interpret NLP models better. Because the truth is that there's a big divide between the research aspect and the industry adoption. So even if though people build the best deep learning model, which is very complex, it's a very rare scenario that it will get adopted, because the people who are making these decisions, they want to understand how or what is contributing to the success or failure of a particular prediction, and it's becoming more and more relevant. So yeah, I would say that.
Okay, and are there thoughts or questions from the crowd on this particular topic? The frontier, the future of natural language processing? I'm really interested in how we can get social theory basically get social theory into all of this text and out of all of this text. That's what I'm really excited about. And the next question I want to kind of pass the mic on, there's one from Meredith here, yeah.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Meredith, Executive Director of the West Hub here. It's really exciting to see this community open up beyond Berkeley for the first time, and also to bring folks from industry who might not have been in our initial discussions. I'm wondering, in considering the frontier, who's missing at the table and who might we strengthen connections with?
And I'll pass this through. If you want to pass, you can pass, but maybe you have an answer.
That's a great and thoughtful question. And I think that this is, language is something that is so, so connected to identity. And I specifically think about when we're training models, for example, how aware are we how aware are we of the biases in our data sets? So for example, sentiment analysis, there's this really great talk and report from Fast Forward Labs out of New York on sentiment analysis that specifically, when you measure sentiment analysis, it weights the voices of men and underweights the voices of women, because women tend to use less dramatic language, online and in speech too. We tend to use more hemming and hawing words because of cultural things. And I think that when we are building algorithms, when we're trying to understand the kinds of models we even think about how to train, it's really important to consider what is even going into our training data sets as we ask those kinds of questions. So just on a really basic level, that's something that I like to think about and remind myself and people around me.
So I may actually be incorrect in saying, someone correct me if I'm wrong, we don't actually have any linguists here right now. Okay, very good. I know we have Jeff in the back.
Come on up.
They're invited. Yeah, but I'm not sure they want to come. So, yeah, we're studying language that we would probably do well to to have these people who the job of the discipline is to say language at the table. Of course, there's a broader theme, too, which can be drawn with, more theoretical, like machine learning people to applied machine learning people, where there's often this like gap between theory and practice, right? And struggling to have all these like really smart people who do theory actually have that like tied to things that we care about. Yeah.
Well, I like those ideas very much. I'll just give a little anecdote, which is that I was working on machine translation for 10 years before I ever bothered to talk to a translator. Then when I started talking to translators, I learned a whole lot about what it takes to make translations. So you get great insight into problems having to do with language if you work with people that work with language all the time.
I'm interested in the kind of bias where large-end statistical work looks like it's really good, but the kinds of places you can do that work aren't representative of the universe of all the places you should be looking at. So, for example, I wrote my dissertation on the Vietnam War and all the data that was generated during that conflict. 1.4 million observations, huge leverage, looks really good. But the Vietnam War is a very idiosyncratic kind of war. It's an American war. We only have the data because how much money was spent on that conflict. When I got into it, you look at all the really good, thick, qualitative case studies that were written during the war. They're the kind of places that U.S. officers spent time and could hang out safely, and they weren't representative of even the rest of the war. And so there's this potential tendency to study things in what looks like a really rigorous way, but is building in these really subtle selection effects or not so subtle selection effects. And so my kind of approach to thinking about this is trying to build knowledge graphs or get data that is more representative of the full universe of cases that we're interested in, expanding the amount of coverage we have. And if we could bring people into that conversation, like Facebook has a names, people, places, and names team. I think that's the things team. If we could get industry to kind of weigh in and provide APIs and help us, because they're all reinventing the wheel and building these data sets over and over from scratch themselves, then in the academic side, we can at least take advantage of that and kind of combine the Big Venn diagram of everything that other people are putting together, rather than doing it ourselves or doing it piecemeal.
So I want to echo the call for more linguists. Devin and I spent a week in Germany a couple months back with a little conference invited by a bunch of Corpus linguists. And I've been reading that stuff kind of from afar for a long time. It's very technical, and it's like if you're not into that Gestalt, it's like, oh, what are they saying? But having hung out with these folks for a week was just amazing. So really sort of the kind of contributions that they bring, kind of the groundedness of sort of the, both the knowledge about language and sort of knowledge about the sort of large scale processing is great. The other thing is, I don't know if it's here actually, the digital humanities, of course. And I spent a fair amount of time over at the Stanford Literary Lab with Franco Moretti and his crowd. And I don't know how much that's known by you folks. I presume probably pretty well. But what I love about that is they're all PhDs in English, and so they know so much. They're writing about Goethe, and they read everything Goethe's ever written. But they're running these big giant data projects on it, and it's that twin sort of deep, rich, intuitive knowledge of the product based on deep scholarship that also can then feed into and inform these kind of formal metrics that I think makes really for the best research, and I think that's great. And of course, the other thing is you need more sociologists, obviously.
Yeah.
I think I've really learned a lot from communications scholars, like going to the International Communications Association last year. How many comm scholars are there? I'm just curious. None? Okay. A few? Okay, yeah, communications.
I would say we need more sociologists, more linguistics, and more psychologists, not only as part of building models or anything like that, but they being also held accountable for the fairness and accountability of a lot of this modeling and predictive models that we do. So they being part of it, they being the decision makers of that group would help a lot.
No argument from me or the other sociologists. I just want to kind of touch on something that I think Rex and Julia brought up that was kind of in the conversation. One of the things that's amazing about big data and all this textual data that's out there is that this is a record of human activity going back as long as we've had writing. And a lot of the methods that we have in social sciences, a lot of them that were big data before, something like survey research, really does tend to obscure and elide the experiences of people in society that are not already empowered. Because our questions are about how power is going to move, how power is going to change something in this particular space in society. And so there are a lot of people who are living very rich, full, and important lives that we should care about that are in one way or another kind of obscured by that type of research. But if we can dig into all of this big textual data, and especially as Rex was mentioning, if we can get into the qualitative deep analysis of it at scale, then we can really hold up a mirror to society and look and see what humans are up to on this planet, what we've been up to for quite a while. The next question I want to ask, because TextXD is so interested in collaboration and cross-pollination across the disciplines, I want each of you to say, what is your background discipline, and then what do you think is great about collaborating with someone who's furthest from you? So if you're a computer scientist, you're thinking about the sociologist. If you're the sociologist, you're thinking about the computer scientist or something like that. What do you like about collaborating with people like that, or maybe you haven't yet? What would you like? What are your fears or your concerns? What makes it difficult? And how can we kind of bridge those gaps?
I think I might have the weirdest background maybe. My undergrad is in physics. My PhD is in astrophysics. I currently work in tech. I have a book published about text mining, but no formal background in computational linguistics at all. I think that like my closest collaborator on like my team has a biostats background. And so what I appreciate the most when I work with someone who has like a lot of really formal statistics or machine learning academic training is the formal understanding of statistics that they bring to some project. What I have appreciated most when I have collaborated on either open source projects or like some interesting side project with someone from, say, a sociology background or kind of the computational end of the social sciences in general is to be honest, like their ethics training. So when you come like from the physics world, like I do, like we literally have never had any ethics training whatsoever. But now half of the data scientists out there come from backgrounds like me, like physics and astrophysics, and we're training models that affect human beings, but we largely have no ethics training whatsoever. So I think that is something that is wonderful, is that when there are more people from the computational ends of the social sciences that have that concern and usually formal training, and like how is what we're doing actually going to affect human beings, like in a formal sense. So those are like positives. I talk long enough, so I'll just skip. Everything's always sunny and wonderful. I'll skip that.
Yeah, so I mean, as far as my background goes, I basically started as a pure mathematician back in college, and like slowly went more and more applied to where now I've been doing deep learning and AI and NLP stuff for about 2 years now. And so I actually haven't really collaborated with anyone like in the social sciences, so I'll take sociology as an example for how I kind of feel about that as an AI guy. And very, very much the first thing that comes to mind is that it all seems very fuzzy to me.
Yes, it is.
Right in. I mean, I kind of run into this a bit when I publish interpretation papers in the AI space, and I can't really get an accuracy number, but I still kind of sort of have to come up with ways to justify my methods. But it seems like it would be a lot harder to do that in a space where just like everyone has their own idea, but whose idea is better. Yeah, who knows? And so yeah, like as an AI guy, like potentially thinking about doing something like that, that's kind of real challenge is trying to bridge those two mindsets, right? Where an AI is basically like if you have if your method's more accurate, then like your paper gets published. Or sometimes if your like algorithm generates prettier pictures, and I mean that's also part of it for that. I call it those kind of things. Yeah, so that's kind of what pops to my mind.
I did want to say, if you feel like you had insufficient ethics training to build models, I never took an ethics class in the first semester I was on campus. I was asked to teach one, so. But anyway, I did a lot of reading. So, I just recently started working on a public health project because they contacted me and they needed someone from computer science. And it's just been a fantastic experience. I think if I had to like highlight two things that I like about trying to work across domains, one is the kind of focus on impact. I mean, like in computer science, sometimes we get excited about the idea or the beauty of an algorithm or something like that, and we kind of forget about whether, millions of people will use it or not. But in public health, that's always a focus. And then the second was because some questions are just so hard to answer. They have a tradition of trying to answer them in multiple ways and seeing if all those views kind of cohere or they don't. So you look at a lot of web data, but you'd also do a targeted survey and some qualitative interviews. And because you can't expect that any one approach is going to tell you everything there is to know about a hard public health problem. And that was new to me, and I like it. It makes a lot of sense. But I don't think if I had hung out with only computer scientists, I would have figured that out on my own.
So rather than, I'm a political scientist by training. I've been out for about 5 years, and I guess I'm closer to what you would call a data scientist now, but that's a made-up term. So what I would say is, rather than thinking about cross fields, I would think more about methodologies, and in particular, the one that's the biggest divide in my shop, and we have people on both sides, which is really helpful because we fight all the time, is between kind of deductive people and inductive people. And I'll just say a bad thing about both sides that they help complement each other for is that the training is catching up, but largely the deductive people are still kind of p-hacking, running garbage can regressions, looking for statistical significance, but they're doing it from a very theoretically oriented perspective, and they're trying to answer questions and trying to sort out underlying causal mechanisms in a way that's admirable, and I think we ought to do. Whereas the inductive folks are trying to find descriptions that are accurate and reflect the data and are parsimonious, but aren't necessarily doing it with an eye towards causality or underlining or trying to understand competing theoretical mechanisms that might be underneath it. And so what I'm hoping is that this kind of next generation of scholars, the next generation of collaborations will show is that when deductive people and inductive people work together, they can apply these massively huge and powerful tools to large data sets in a way that helps figure out causality, helps to start sorting out different theoretical mechanisms, where an outcome might be completely overdetermined, but you can say, out of 500 theories, here are the top 3 most likely, here's the next study you need to run to try to start sorting between those 3, using variable importance and some of the things we saw earlier about interpreting, manifolds that are really nasty. I hope that's where this is going, and that's where we're trying to go right now.
Okay, collaborations, with a lot of different kinds of collaborations. So you collaborate with your students, you collaborate with different folks. But nowadays I do almost nothing but that, and it's because I have a great time with it. Now, I'll give one example. I work right now with a person, she's a sociologist, her name's Robin Wagner-Pacifici. She's a professor at the New School, but she is not a quantitative person. She would describe herself as a, quote, close reader, right? She's like an anthropologist who studies texts and dives deep. The experience of working with her is just amazing because it's like I look at a text and I go, yeah, stuff going on there, interesting, a couple of things. And I pass it to her, and she's like, oh, you know, and she's like, just got so much insight. Like, you know, did you notice the way the passive voice is working against the sort of the alternative experiences of like what's being brought up in the different clauses? And it's like my head just spins because it's like it just opens up a completely different sort of venue into what I've been looking at. And that is what's so exciting to me about collaboration. It's just sort of like, you know, you're kind of in your gestalt, you kind of know how to solve problems, that's what you do. You like learn how to publish, and then you keep publishing that because that's what you do, and then you get paid for it. And so when somebody you're collaborating with pushes you in completely different terrain or completely different sorts of insights, it's just like that creative energy just flows through you, and again, it's really fun. And it just feels like a completely different world. So I'm being a cheerleader up here, but I just think it's really one of the nicest things. I think not enough people do it. I think we kind of hug onto our little, you know, island, like, you know, I'm safe here and I want to stay there and publish the hell out of it, and that's good. But I do think like reaching in completely different places is just one of the best things you can do as a scholar.
I'm a sociology grad student now, but my bachelor's was in like engineering, and I did like a lot of computer science and math stuff. And I'm kind of early in my collaboration game. I've kind of been like bumbling around a lot. So I try to work with my peers in sociology, and I feel like the problems are somewhat technical. Like one of my colleagues wanted to analyze like YouTube comments. So like, okay, I have 600,000 comments on a Taylor Swift video. Like I gave it to him as a spreadsheet. It's like, oh, you can't really open the spreadsheet that big. Stuff like that. There are a lot of like challenges to being able to do like the close reading and the thick description if you don't have access to the tools. And then I also try to work with computer scientists where, yeah, as you mentioned, for a lot of the work you need sort of like a value at the end that says like, this is how accurate it is. And then that sort of undermines some of the assumptions of like text as subjective meaning, text as culture. So that's just some of the early experiences I've had.
Hello. So my background, my undergrad is in computer science and engineering, and then my master's was focused on computer science, with focus on machine learning, information retrieval, databases, statistical modeling. And with respect to collaboration, I've been trying to collaborate with domain experts, is how I would state it. The reason why, it could be linguistic, it could be domain expert from a particular field, is I was doing a project on topic modeling, and I was doing a project where I had to not only identify customer reviews have a positive or negative sentiment, I also had to extract information why the particular person says something is not good. So, you know, what are the exact phrases and stuff. So now in that setting, it becomes very important to understand a rep from a customer success department to understand what kind of text did they see occurring often, and what are the adjectives that are occurring more often. At the same time, if one is trying to understand more subjective meaning, I might need more support from a linguistic to understand how are the words generally related to each other so that I could extract that information in a better way. So yeah, I've been even with this project Skater, I've been trying to reach out to domain experts and to understand how or what techniques are more practical to solve a particular problem.
Let's give a round to our panelists.